148 houses that are allocated to ministers and their deputies. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts says it's concerned and someone needs to answer. Our SCOPA chairperson Themba Godi joins us now from our Cape Town studios. Mr. Godi, thanks for your time tonight. Firstly, it seems that SCOPA was quite surprised by these details, but the record shows it's not the first time the Public Works Department comes before Parliament and talks about the kind of refurbishments that are being made to ministerial houses. In November, to be exact, a similar report was brought before Parliament of over 500 million. I think it was about 700 million rand, also allocated to braai areas. So why is it that you seem to be taken by surprise by these details?
Well, I'm not sure about the figure that you have given, and the issue around braai stands for ministers came for the first time in our discussions with them in June. That's why we asked them to go and bring us details, and that is why we're only discussing it today. But yes, the issue of ministerial houses, their maintenance, renovations, purchase, issues that will be central to public works. And I'm sure you'll appreciate that there's so much wrong in public works that whilst you may look at one or two issues at a time, there will be 4 or 5 other issues that also cry out for attention. And today, well, we looked on those areas that were isolated in June.
How often does the Public Works Department come before SCOPA? And my question is really pointing to, is it the first time that, in terms of SCOPA, that you are hearing of this?
Well, in terms of that level of detail, yes. Remember that we have over 250 departments and public entities whose financials we are scrutinizing. And we have a very high number of departments and entities that are on the wrong side of the law. And so it would happen that sometimes you'll find that public works might have escaped scrutiny at a particular point in time. But we always endeavor to look at everybody, looking at budget, looking at areas and levels of wrongdoing. Yes, it's not the first time that public work has come before us, especially the property management trading entity, which is the holding body for the department, separate from the department.
And certainly, one of the concerns you've raised is that it's not just about the amount of money that is being spent on these utilities. It's also the actual amount of money that's also being spent on the houses for ministers and their deputies.
Well, look, I think what one can note about our processes is that we have decided to put a sharper focus on specific areas. I mean, you would have seen last week with our visit to SAA, we had a much sharper focus than before on specific areas. Same with public works. Right now, we were looking at deviations. And it was in the process of dealing with deviations that these matters around ministerial houses, around the 4 companies that they must come back with next week, Wednesday, that we have put our focus. And and if you look at today's outcomes, we're actually shining the torch on ministerial privileges to say, but you can't just pledge, you know, without any caps, without any inhibition, taking into account the state of the economy, taking into account the levels of inequality in our country and the poverty that the people that we are representing here are suffering. So, and we're happy that the minister has committed to taking this to the president and taking it to cabinet to make sure that the ministerial handbook is reviewed, especially in relation to the matters of ministerial houses.
And certainly you bring up the word deviations, and out of the inquiry into state capture today, we heard from Willie Matebula, the Treasury official, that deviations are often used as a means to actually shortcut the process of course, issuing tenders, and often that's where the real fraud and irregularity takes place. From what you're seeing, especially within the Public Works Department, and you're looking into this deviations matter, would you agree?
No, very true. Actually, because we've realized that deviations are being abused, we've made it a point that National Treasury should report to us on a quarterly basis on deviations in various departments. And secondly, with relation to public works, you will note that there are 4 tenders that we have said they must report on by next week, Wednesday. But as for the bulk of the other cases that we're dealing with in June, it was only after they met with us that they were jumping up now into action to investigate them. We're expecting that by the end of September, they should have a report and come back to report on us so that we can scrutinize each transaction point by point. And as I'm talking to you now, tomorrow we're having ESCOM. We're going to deal with the same thing, deviations, because we are concerned by the high volumes and the high rent values of these deviations, which seem to have become a way of avoiding going through the tender processes and short-circuiting the system. And we worry that that's where a lot of nepotism and favoritism would happen.
Let's look at these 148 houses that the Public Works Department would be overseeing on behalf of the state, which go to ministers and their deputies, as you've mentioned. Do we know how much, on average, is being spent in terms of maintaining these houses and also paying their taxes and rates?
Well, those are issues that had never been put before Parliament. And for next week, Wednesday, we have requested that for the last 2 financial years, they must give us the amount spent on maintenance, because we also realize that that part of maintenance of these houses is also another area, a gray area, where a lot of wastage can happen or is happening. So we're not dealing with these matters at a generic level, but we're really sharpening our focus on specific areas that we believe, if they are contained, we can begin the process of limiting the space for wrongdoing, which we believe is based on serious syndicates within and outside the department.
Out of this process, Mr. Gordy, would you want to see a limit, not just on the amount of money that can be used to buy a so-called ministerial house, but actually on the amount of money that is spent on these houses, whether it is for a minister or their deputy?
Look, and I said this in the meeting, last night one of the ministers actually called out on me to say that as Parliament we are not putting sufficient pressure or focus on their accommodation, because as far as was concerned, it was a waste of money. He has a 4 or 6 bedroomed house and he stays there alone and only uses the kitchen, the sitting room, the study, the bedroom and the bathroom, and that's it. So we are saying that we need to have a review. There has to be a cap, because if you look at social development, when there's disaster, there is a cap on the amount you should use to buy a mattress. There's a cap on the amount you should use to buy a blanket. Why is it that when it comes to ministers, it's like you can just pledge as much as you want without any sense of a formal cap or without any conscience? So as COPA was saying, no, look at the economy, look at the context of where we are, look at the inequality, look at the poverty. Surely you can't be spending in a way that puts such a gulf between the opulence of ministers and the poverty that ordinary people experience on a daily basis.
And certainly the fact that you even have to have this conversation with ministers who are representatives of those people who are in office because they voted in by those very people
True.
that you're talking about, Mr. Godi,
True.
that in itself speaks volumes.
No, very true. It's a very shameful discussion to have for people who represent very poor people who here, just outside, not far from this parliament, people who live in shacks that are burning every windy season, shacks that are flooded every rainy season, year in and year out. But we have no sense about the amounts of monies that we must spend on ourselves and not say how much money we should spend on our people. It's a very shameful discussion to have, unfortunately.
All right, that's where we leave it for tonight, and we'll be looking ahead to that sitting that you'll be holding with ESCOM tomorrow.